Hello, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Kevin Dawson, and this is Module 7. This will be my summative assessment over Genesis, the book of Genesis. I'll be doing an overview for my class. Shout out Professor Meek, did an excellent job these 7 weeks for this class, and I'll be going over one of my favorite books, one of my the most important books of the Bible, in my opinion, Genesis. I'll be going over the overall theme, the major themes, the theological issues, and the relevance to the Israelite religion, Judaism, and how it all ties together. Within this book, we see a connection to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. As we go through the overview and the entirety of the book, through all its chapters, we will be going over how they connect to different nations of this time. The major themes of this book are creation, sin, love, a covenant, an everlasting covenant, family relationships, and a divine plan that is interwoven through all 50 chapters. In the beginning, we see in chapter 1, God is mentioned as Elohim, who is the creator of the cosmos, the universe, and earth. In chapter 2, he goes by a different name, Yahweh Elohim, which is the Lord God. And now we have the mention of the creation of man and the giving man the dominion over all. In this second chapter, we see how much God loves us, how much he loves his creation, and then we see it all come to crap in chapter 3, which is the fall, or the introduction into sin. In verse 15, we hear prophecy being spoken through this story. So we have Adam and Eve created in chapter 2, and then in chapter 3 we have Eve eating of the forbidden fruit, and the separation of God and man, the removal of man from the Garden of Eden into a sinful world. Now, a theological issue that comes up from this point of view is, why such an extreme punishment? Why is the biting of a fruit sending God into an uproar almost? Well, we see this comparison through the holiness that is God. It's immeasurable, so we cannot even fathom the disrespect that is caused by this to a deity that only knows good. We also see love, theological issue of love mentioned in here. So even through man's evil nature, God is still attempting to reconcile with him, despite the appearance of sin in this chapter. Moving on to chapter 4, we see Cain and Abel, which further shows the evil nature of man by the murder of Abel. I believe this chapter shows us what we truly are capable of. Chapter 5, we see the genealogy of Adam to Noah, and we see Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. On to chapter 6, we are getting to the corruption of man and what has been going on the other side of this genealogy from Adam to Noah, which is the Benai Elohim, mating with the daughters of man, and creating a hybrid race called Nephilim. These beings, these giants, are terrorizing God's creation to the point where God says, I've had enough. And in chapters 7 through 9, we see God single out Noah as the last remaining pure seed of his creation, and the creation of the ark. Noah at this point is 500 years old. It takes him 100 years to build this ark. So at the age of 600, the flood happens. All of mankind is wiped out, and Noah and his family are last remaining family. In chapter 9, we see Noah curse his grandson Canaan. And this is after Ham, Canaan's father, sees Noah, and in his drunkenness and nakedness, after really realizing that the world is gone, he goes and tells his brothers Shem and Japheth, who go and cover him. Now we move on to chapter 10. We see genealogy mentioned from Noah to Abram. This is considered the second portion of the book of Genesis, because now we are bringing in a very prominent historical figure, Abram. In chapter 11, where the Tower of Babel is mentioned, which is a group of people who at this point, the entirety of humanity all speaks the same language. And we see them creating the Tower of Babel as a means of rebellion against the one true God, Elohim. This causes God to be angry. He sends down confusion, and now we have the birth of many languages. After this chapter, in chapter 11, at the end of it, we see another genealogy from Shem, which is Noah's son, to Abram. And now we have Abram, who is God is communicating with directly. God calls Abram to Egypt, where he receives a blessing and provision, seemingly through a lie. He finds finds his wife Sarai, who is very fair, very beautiful amongst all Egyptians, to the point where the princes of Pharaoh are trying to grab her. Well, they find out that this is in fact Abraham's wife, and the Pharaoh is upset. Why are you doing this? Why are you trying to trick me? And at that point, they've already given Sarah so much gold and calf and cattle and things of this nature that they just tell Abraham, get your wife and get out of here. So Abram has now been blessed tremendously. In chapter 13, we see Abram's nephew Lot, who has also been very blessed. They part ways, and chapter 13 also marks the first promise of Abram being the progenitor of many nations. At this point, Abram is around 60 or 70 years old, has no children. Chapter 14, we see Lot get kidnapped by the kings of the land. Abram raids these group of kings with 318 men of his, and takes all the spoils of the war. The next chapter, we see a second blessing of Abram being the progenitor of many nations, also an allusion to Ishmael. And then a covenant is made for a large portion of land. After this, chapter 16, Ishmael is born, but it is through Sarah's handmaiden, Hagar. This is not how God made it happen, but Hagar is promised a multitude through her son as well, and this is an allusion to Islam. This is where they receive their identity and their heritage from. Now we move on to chapter 17. The covenant, God establishes a covenant with Isaac, who is to be Abraham's next son, and this is also where we see the creation of circumcision, which is a binding factor of the covenant between Abraham and God, to have a multitude of seed and to be a progenitor of many nations. Chapter 18, God visits Abraham once again and lets him know his plans of destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. Abram makes a plea with God and says, if you can find at least 10 souls, save the city. Well, lo and behold, in chapter 19, not even 10 souls are found. Only Lot is the only family that is considered to be pure and of righteousness within the city. So at that point, in chapter 19, Lot flees Sodom and Gomorrah, and now we are coming to chapter 21, where Isaac is born. The birth of Isaac brings about a dissension, almost, a despicable look in Sarah's eye towards Hagar and Ishmael, to the point where she's like, you gotta get that boy out of here. So Ishmael's cast out, but not before God makes a promise to make Ishmael a great nation out of Ishmael. And this is where we start to see Ishmael's genealogy, and it is a connecting factor to the prophet Muhammad. Now that is another religion, not the Israelite religion, but we see that connecting factor through this man Abram. In chapter 22, we have the third promise of Abram being a progenitor. And we also see his name change from Abram to Abraham. God tests Abraham and tells him, this is your first and only son. I need you to sacrifice him. Abraham doesn't even budge. He goes and is getting ready to sacrifice his son. But then we see that there is a ram in the bush. God has provided a sacrifice for him. Next, we move on to chapter 25. Abraham dies at the ripe old age of 175, gives Isaac everything, and he has many sons with other concubines. He tells all of them to go into the land and leave this area for Isaac. Isaac ends up having 2 sons on his own with a daughter named Rebecca, who is actually his cousin. She has twins, Jacob and Esau, and it has been and the birthright of these two is given to the younger son, Jacob. Next, chapter 26, we see Isaac receiving the same progenitor blessing that was given to Abraham. Then we move on to chapter 35. Jacob is changed, his name is changed to Israel in verse 10. And then chapter 37, we see the emergence of Joseph, who is really the connecting factor to history in Egypt. So Joseph is one of 12 sons of Israel, i.e. Jacob. And they cast him out because, one, he's one of the favorites. He's considered Jacob's favorite, and he's been removed. Well, Jacob gets sold into slavery. Joseph gets sold into slavery, becomes Pharaoh's right-hand man, and later brings his entire family from the chapters of 37 and 47, brings his entire family, which is now a nation, the nation of Israel, into Egypt, where they reside in Goshen. Now Genesis ends at chapter 50. Joseph dies, but not before promising God's deliverance to the promised land. The relevance to Israelite religion is the establishment of the entire culture. We see from, one man, Adam, all the way down to Joseph and his fellow cousins and brothers create the entire nation of Islam, who are now residing within the land of Goshen, adjacent to Egypt. We also see the beginning of the covenant. We see where Abraham is blessed, and this nation of Israelites is going to further be God's people, and the only nation without a king at this point. They are able to track their identity and their national heritage through this book. We see the divine plan mentioned, the prophecy through Joseph, where he says, God has meaning all of this for good, and a ton of family conflicts and rivalry. One, we see the conflict between Jacob and Esau. Then we see the conflict between the brothers and Joseph, the conflict between Cain and Abel. Just a ton of things that need to get worked out. So throughout this book, all the major themes are showcased, and even in comparison with the books of this time, the only 2 books that I could find mentioned are the Diamond Sutra and the Epic of Gilgamesh. Epic of Gilgamesh being a poetic verse about how eternal life is inevitable, and the Diamond Sutra, which is a Buddhist book, similarly on existentialism. Now, between these two, compared to Genesis, we see the emergence of a God who knows everything, has a divine plan, and just needs us to obey, versus, kind of a questioning of the universe and how all of this ties in together. I personally would read, if I was in that time frame, I would connect more with Genesis due to the factor of love from a divine being. Which is very hard to come by if you study the rest of the theologies. So if you haven't read Genesis, I would invite you to read it, if not from a theological standpoint, from a historical one, and you can see just how these nations and these religions kind of all tie together. Very beautiful book. Thank you very much for listening. Have a good day.